So I'm Henry Webster. I head up the kind of product management team for media services within the BBC, within BBC Future Media. And the thing that I'm tasked and my team is tasked with doing is delivering the IP video and audio service for the BBC. I've not been to too many sessions here over the last couple of days, but those that I have seen, quite a lot have been reminiscing a bit about the past and a bit about where we've come and how we've come a long way in a short space of time. I'm going to do a bit of the same because I've been working in this field for quite some time. So this April, the BBC celebrated 20th anniversary of BBC Online. So this was specifically the anniversary of the launch of the BBC Networking Club in April '94. So we weren't doing video quite in '94, but very soon after that, we started dipping our toe into internet video and internet audio for the first time with Real Networks, amongst others. And I'm kind of fortunate enough to have worked for the BBC for most of the time that we've been doing video. Things have moved a long way. I joined the BBC News Online team in about 2000, and our kind of the mainstream of our video was basically the size of a postage stamp. In fact, I'm not even sure it was the size of this postage stamp. I think it was the size of a normal postage stamp. And at 34 kilobits per second. That's about as high as we got when I started. So in reality, difficult to describe it as video at all compared to what we know today. So as I say, we were using Real at the time. Broadband was in its infancy. Even where there was broadband available, that came in over the following few years. It was very, very low network speeds, sort of starting off at 256 and 500 kilobits per second. Then we added some Windows into the mix and latterly moved to Flash. So all very proprietary approaches, which is something I'm kind of hoping we can move away from with the future in MPEG Dash and HTML5. For me, though, 2012 and the Olympic Games was quite a game-changing moment for us in the online video and audio space. It was the first time that we'd genuinely done HD streaming at any scale, so we've done a number of trials and kind of innovation strands before that in HD, but very little in the kind of mainstream. So this was the first time we'd done that in the mainstream. And it's the first time, really, that we'd had a proposition that went truly across all of the different platforms. So we were delivering from phones through tablets to desktop PCs and smart TVs. But the other thing that really changed for us is that it marked a stark change in approach. And I think whilst we had a remit throughout the build-up to the Olympics to innovate, to do new cool things, to make stuff more exciting, the real key message that came out from our management was don't screw it up. Get it right. Let's make sure that we deliver this service robustly and properly and don't disappoint our audience with the cool stuff that we were doing. So we spent a lot of time and effort working with a number of partners to ensure that we delivered a very robust service for the London 2012 Games. We'd had previous experience of big events, obviously, dealing with a number of terrorism events over the years, and obviously the World Cup in 2010 had given us some idea of what to expect, but very, very difficult to predict, actually, the growth in traffic levels that we had, especially with new devices coming on. So I kind of suggest that actually in 2012, 18 years after we'd started BBC Online, with that little toe in the water, I'd argue this is kind of where the BBC Media offering really came of age. We began to treat it a bit more than just a series of interesting experiments and actually as a genuine service that we were delivering with scale, robustness and resilience built in from the outset. And to do that, we drew really heavily on the BBC's history. So the BBC's got a long history of broadcasting, obviously. In the last 92 years, we've learned a thing or two about it. But I guess organisationally we'd been quite separate from that. We've been in the internet world allowed to get on with stuff and allowed to play with stuff and allowed to just do things in our own way. And I think what we did with the Olympics was take that opportunity to actually really learn from our broadcasting colleagues what broadcast continuity meant, what building in resilience from day one meant. So, of course, television and radio went through exactly the same process. Initially, those broadcasts were very experimental, first in radio, then into television, but soon they became something that the British public really relied on, and as they became mainstream, there was a very high expectation of the service from the public. And very quickly, any outages in that service became something that were newsworthy in their own right. So they occurred very rarely, but that broadcast continuity, the effort that went in to deal with that, to get us to a place where outages were rare, was hard won and didn't come cheap. So that transition, I think, between the experimental services and kind of a core delivery is kind of where we're at today with online distribution. For many of our audience already, iPlayer is one of those services that they'd struggle to live without. They really miss it when it's gone, and we hear that very, very clearly from our audience if we have any problems. So people begin to rely on it, the expectations become much greater, and BBC iPlayer now is receiving upwards of 10 million requests every day for media, and although that only represents about 2% of the overall consumption of BBC output, that's growing, and obviously times are changing. The kind of move towards making BBC Three digital only is one of the interesting shifts in our content provision coming up. But the expectations around uptime are really high. iPlayer outages in themselves now are newsworthy. They tend to make the press if we have a bad day. So what we've done is we've re-engineered the way that we deliver and provision iPlayer is to build in resilience and a kind of idea of broadcast continuity into that all the way through. That's not to say that we didn't do that before. Every stage of the development since '97 with 2007 with iPlayer, we've built it to the best abilities and to the best that we could do with the budget that we have. But that architecture didn't necessarily represent the importance that the platform was beginning to have. So that was the shift that we needed to make, both in the business and in how we went about architecting it. So given that there's a public outcry when we get it wrong, the other thing is that people do shout about loudly is performance. So and the audience really think performance is almost as important as availability. One of the things we get complaints about more than anything else is how quickly we can deliver programs to the platform. So if those programs aren't available instantly at the end of the program, which they aren't always, that's one of the things that is the most regular complaint we get to iPlayer. From our side, we've obviously got to deal with, as many of you do, the complexity of delivering to thousands of devices. So iPlayer is now available on literally thousands of devices, from smart TVs, tablets, mobiles. We've got 7 TV channels, so we simulcast 7 of those TV channels live, 24/7, and we will scale up to over 20 TV channels when we add the regional variations, which is one of the things that we're hoping to do fairly shortly. And we produce over 1,000 hours, 1,000 unique hours of content catch-up every week. So generally that's available immediately after broadcast. Sometimes when those are live programs or they're delivered very late to us, because we have both a file-based workflow and a kind of online workflow, then they take a little bit longer to get through. And all of those assets are available for streaming, most of them available for download, and to all of those different devices. So we learnt, I think, a lot from our broadcast colleagues. And what we learnt, we fed into the project that we set up to rebuild the provisioning of iPlayer. So outages were still frequent. minor generally, but that we did have them. Buffering is a reality of use. Black screens weren't uncommon. We occasionally put the wrong video up. And ultimately, we weren't all that fast at responding to failure either. So all of these things were things that we picked on as things that we needed to challenge as we went through. So we learned very much the importance of building in resilience at every step. So building in redundancy, ensuring that we've got resilience in every single place in the chain. And the cloud and choosing to use the cloud helped us achieve some of that, because in a way we couldn't have afforded or really dreamt of building out the sort of resilient model that we wanted if it was in an on-premise world, because that would mean building out multiple data centers and populating lots of hot instances all over the place. In the cloud, we're able to spin services up when things fail. And that really helped us to achieve a level of resilience that we probably wouldn't have managed otherwise. So we pulled together a project that we called VideoFactory to rectify a lot of those problems, but also just in our ability to deliver and our ability to be flexible to meeting the audience expectations. It took quite a while for us to get buy-in from across the organisation. That was one of the things that we spent quite a lot of time actively doing to help them understand the importance in spending money on getting a resilient service and spending money on resilience. So we need to look at a significant shift in attitudes, and I think the Olympics really helped us get that buy-in and really helped us be able to move forward and cement that approach. So what is VideoFactory? So we were fortunate enough to have a break point in September 2013. So we'd hardly drawn breath from delivering the London Olympic Games, but we had a point where our incumbent, so Red Bee, was producing our content for iPlayer at the time. That contract served us really well from the start of iPlayer in 2007 through to 2013. But it did pose some restrictions on us, and what we decided to do then was to do a complete rebuild in-house and to bring back that process back into the BBC. So we were very clear that what we wanted to do is build a scalable, message-driven, cloud-based architecture. And we'll talk a little bit more about the detail of how we went about doing that. But it was the result of about a year's worth of effort from about 18 engineering staff. So here they are. Just want to talk a little bit about the way we work with that team. So we're very clear that we wanted to have a small focused team. We had dedicated product management and delivery management effort around that. They had very clear and defined scope and priorities, and that was one of the things we fought to maintain throughout the project. It's always very easy, certainly in a big organisation like ourselves, to get swayed by the latest new thing or whatever the latest pet project is. And we were very clear that we wanted to, part of the purpose of having product management in there was about giving those engineering staff a bit of top cover to enable them to get on with really delivering great code without having to deal with lots of scope changes that are going on the whole time. The other thing that we instituted, and obviously the cloud helps with this as well, is the approach of delivering early and delivering often. So we got into a cadence of doing lots and lots of updates and employing a kind of continuous delivery approach for the first time, which was a big shift for us, something that hadn't really been done previously in the organisation, but really paid off in terms of how we were able to go about delivering. We also worked to a set of clear product principles. So we set this out in the outset. The old system that we had, although it was very ambitious at the time, had a very ambitious target around how much throughput we could deal with it. That was 5 years ago. Industry's moved on an awful lot in that space of time with new devices, new delivery methods, and just the amount of content that we wanted to get up onto the internet. So the audience expectations were greater. and we had to match that. So clearly, bringing it back in-house, one of the great advantages that gave us was the ability to take full control over deploying and managing the service, and be more flexible around delivering changes. And I think when you're in an industry such as ours, where change is a constant and things are happening the whole time, being beholden to making a change request and going through a change request process for any new changes is quite slow. We wanted to really reduce that loop time so that we can add new things in much quicker. So we wanted to be faster. So we talked already about the fact that our audience really expects that stuff to be there the minute it comes off TV. So particularly around some of our peaks, we'll talk about it in a bit more detail in a minute, but local news is one of the things that we really struggled to deliver anything like in real time. Often it didn't appear until the next day. We wanted to deal with scalability, so previously our incumbent system had a fixed level of capacity. We weren't able to expand very easily. Anything we needed to do took a long time to work through and to expand through. We wanted to take that limit away and enable ourselves to be in a position where we could scale very rapidly. Talked a bit about how how we needed to be more flexible. We also obviously wanted to deliver higher quality across the piece. Again, something that was very difficult to do with the kind of fairly static publishing process that we had before. Also the incumbent service was very manual. There was a lot of manual pushing through of content to get that to air. And we wanted to get to a place where this was more automated, and that, again, learning from broadcast, a lot of the broadcast playout is automated. There's no reason why we couldn't use that information to actually drive through the production process to iPlayer. And we wanted to use the advantages of the cloud. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. So a lot of what we were doing with the VideoFactory project was to take away the kind of artificial limits that we had in place. We wanted to take away the limit on the number of hours so that we could produce as many hours as our broadcast colleagues threw at us and get it published and out onto iPlayer. So previously we were only able to do something like 400 hours in a week, and we wanted to be able to raise that, and we have raised that now to over 1,000 hours in a week. And if more content gets thrown at us, we spend a bit more money, but we get it pushed through. We also had a very strict limit on the on the amount of HD hours that we could manage. So we previously could only manage around 40 hours of HD. Now we're handling hundreds. And frankly, we prefer HD as an ingest format. We see benefits in quality right across the board. So we're happy to absorb that wherever, again, our broadcast colleagues can throw that at us. Delivery formats and encoding profiles, obviously, again, very, very static process, very, very slow for us to make changes in that way. And the new process needed to enable us to be much more fluid about making changes to encode rates, to sizes of the encodes, and also what delivery formats we output it to. So, I mean, just as an example, HLS was one of the things that caught us out when the iPhones arrived. Really struggled to implement that in short order. It took us a long time to get something live in a new format, and we didn't want to be in a position where we were caught out with that again, and we wanted to be able to react much quicker to where the market was going. The other thing that we wanted to do was to align the live chains with the VOD and the on-demand chains. So previously these have been quite separate units. So we'd had a number of encoders that just pushed stuff out to the live constantly, and we had a VOD chain that was just chundering through files and making them into the new formats. What we wanted to do is align those two things, bring them back into one operational system. So that had operational benefits because we've just had one system that we were maintaining and looking after. But also enable us to do some of the things like live to VOD, so actually reusing the assets that we were delivering for live for VOD delivery to help speed us up significantly in the VOD delivery chain. We did a little bit of experimentation around that during the Olympics. I don't know how many of you used the BBC services during the Olympics, but we did deliver a lot of the content. So we delivered up to 27 different channels at any given time, and it had long sessions of sport that we then turned around as quickly as we could. But even then, we were still taking hours to turn that content round. It was using a live to VOD process, but it was a very slow one. We've made big gains in that as part of the VideoFactory process. We wanted to get to this place, and I think it's a place that a lot of us have ambitions to be, where actually content's always available from the point of TX. So there isn't a gap, and the user can get straight to that content. So we launched before the Olympics the kind of idea of live rewind and doing the kind of trick play in the PVR type space. And we wanted to get to a place where that was absolutely seamless. Now, we're not quite there yet, but we have a lot of the building blocks in place that allow us to do that. So we chose to use the cloud for a couple of main reasons. So lots of ancillary benefits, but the main reasons were our output's surprisingly peaky. As I mentioned earlier, we go from kind of 6 base channels to 24 plus channels at certain points in the day. And the real point, the big spikes that you can see here are really around the 1830 regional news bulletins. So what happens at that point is that all of the different variants of BBC One take a regional news bulletin. And what was happening with our incumbent system, our previous system, was that at 7 o'clock it would get an enormous amount of demand to encode 27 different things in all of the profiles that we're having to do, and was taking most of the rest of the night to catch back up. So we were really struggling to get that stuff out. Of course, this is also news content, and news content loses its value quite quickly if people can't actually see it. So it really made that content not very usable at all. So this is kind of a perfect pattern for an elastic architecture, and now we just scale up for that period of time and deliver all of those news bulletins within half an hour or so. And as we start implementing and rolling out the live to VOD services, it'll be much faster than that. So the other reason that we moved to the cloud, I guess, was, and I kind of touched on it earlier, was the abilities that gives us around resilience, the ability to run lots and lots of different services, to spin new things up if they break, something that we just couldn't have done in a kind of build on-premise architecture. So I've talked a lot about resilience already, but this is kind of how we actually went about delivering it. So we took the approach of architecting from the outset with that broadcast continuity in mind. So the way we do it now is using the best available tech and building out from first principles with that in mind all the way through. So now our initial video capture is based in our 2 CCMs. Now CCM is the central coding and mux area. So this is the broadcast delivery place. So this is the place that is actually doing TX, doing the transmission for our digital TV chains. So we now have our capture boxes sitting alongside the same encoders that are doing that for digital TV. That gives us quite a lot of different benefits. One of the main ones is that obviously that is sited in the heart of the broadcast operation, is managed by the same group of people who manage the broadcast operation, who really get the importance. They're a 24/7 team. They're sitting there monitoring these services day in, day out. They have all of the kit for monitoring these services. These are Thomson encoders that we're using, which align with the playout services that we've got as well. So they've got very high level of broadcast monitoring around that. And from that, we use diverse network paths and push that content up into the cloud. I can talk a little bit more about the detail of how we go about that in a minute. And from there, it's picked up on resilient cloud storage, so using Amazon's S3 cloud service. And we've talked about the fact that there are a number of auto-scaling components in there which allow us to have failures or to manage different peaks in load as we go through. And then at the other end of the chain, we use multiple CDN partners to deliver that content to the user. So that's about a number of things, but primarily it's about mitigating any one CDN having a bad day with any particular area or any particular service, and I think that's a kind of key piece of our delivery chain. So here's a bit of a diagram. It's not terribly easy to see, but just gives you a bit of an indication of, we've got 2 capture sites, so we're capturing the content in our 2 central coding and MUX areas. They're running hot and delivering over a diverse network into the cloud, into S3 buckets. So and they're just running constantly. So they're running constantly, chunking up 24/7 our main channels. And we have available in S3 4 variants. So from each capture site, that's sending 2 variants of each bit of content, and so by the time it gets to the cloud, we've got 4 variants to choose from and to use. So quite heavily resilient in that part of the architecture. So then, and it just gives you an indication of how the processing and transcoding is all done in the cloud, and then we push out to our CDN partners on the other side, again via diverse network paths. So it wasn't just really the fact that online media was coming of age, it was also the first major use for cloud computing in the BBC. And that wasn't necessarily a natural fit, and I'll talk about some of the challenges that we had around cloud computing as we go through. But the architecture approach that we took was a message-driven one. There are sort of in the region, I think it's gone up a bit from this, in fact, of 50 small components that we run in the cloud at any one time. And the mantra that we use for that is those components should do one thing and do it really well. And so whenever the temptation is to bundle a number of different functions up into a component, we try and tackle that bloat and break it back out into individual components. That helps us enormously with testing, but it's also just great practice, and it means that that we're much more flexible about our approach. So our initial focus when we delivered this was to ensure the lights didn't go out on iPlayer. So we had a hard deadline. We had a contract end date with Red Bee of September 2013. As I say, we'd just come out, the engineering team had just come out from doing the Olympics, so it was pretty much straight onto this. And our first approach was really about what's the basic way we can ensure that the lights don't go out on iPlayer and we can continue a service in a really resilient manner. So what we did in the first instance is pretty much this. Again, the SDI broadcast feed, that's the capture node in the CCM. So the broadcast encoder is the Thomson we talked about. We then take the RTP packets, chunk that up and push it to S3. So that's a component that we've built that pushes content over to S3. And then using either data, either playout data, so triggers directly from the playout service that says from this time to this time is a program, or using a manual service if that information isn't available or is late or for whatever reason. We can then ask from the S3 bucket, it's a time addressable media store, so we say, right, from 9 o'clock to 9:30 is this program, grab me those chunks, concatenate those chunks back together, and then to push those via a transcode abstraction layer back out to our transcoding platforms. So we've got a number of different transcoding platforms. We detail 2 of them here. I think we've actually got 3 in place at the moment. So we're using Elemental Cloud's platform, which is probably the predominant transcode provider at the moment. But we also use Amazon's Elastic Transcoder, and we're using Encoding.com and some other bits and pieces in the mix as well. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about the fact that the importance of kind of abstracting that transcode layer out. So this is kind of just a slightly deeper dive on that mezzanine capture process. So again, as I say, we use Thomson encoders that are in the broadcast centres alongside the digital playout for transmission. They're pushing out an MPEG-2 transport stream, which we then chunk up into chunks, push into the S3, and bring them all together just at the point where we actually want to transcode those into the final formats. So just a bit about the kind of throughput that we've got. As I said, we're 24 channels, 6 of those are HD, 18 are SD as it stands. We're pushing through something in the region of 16 terabytes of mezzanine data every day per capture, and that stands in at about 200,000 chunks a day, or 2 billion RTP packets. And we're not dropping very many, if any. So one of the areas that, having worked through this, this part of the industry for a while, I was very keen on is having some ability to avoid kind of vendor lock-in and also use the various different transcode providers for the things that they do really well, because not all transcode providers can do every platform or every service or every variant really nicely. So the ability to actually abstract the transcode layer and be able to layer in different services for different areas of the service was something that I was very keen to ensure that we had. So what we built is this kind of transcode routing service. So when the routing service receives a request, it makes a choice based on some business logic about which of the services, which of the back ends it uses to actually deliver the assets. And as you can see there, we've got a separate back end, so that's a back end that will talk the language of each of the different services that we might use. And we're also using different models then in the transcode services themselves. So for the example of Elemental Cloud, that's effectively a platform as a service. We certainly in the audio space, which is the kind of product we're getting onto next, have actually bought outright a number of software licenses and then are spinning those up independently on the cloud rather than using a platform. So it also allows us to have that kind of mixed economy of different models and different methods of going about that stuff. The other thing that you see here, one of the transcode routes, is actually a subtitle extraction backend. That's something we've decided to write ourselves, so that extracts the subtitles from that mezzanine file. So we're not talking very much about the file-based route at the moment. We've also got a file-based route as well, and we have a file-based delivery route for subtitles. But where those subtitles aren't available, again, specifically around live programming or stuff that arrives very late, we can actually extract those subtitles from the mezzanine and reuse them for the various different platforms. The other great thing about this is it's very hybrid cloud friendly. So it's easy for us to then route a kind of baseline of content to local encoders that we might have on premise. So we were lucky enough to have a reasonable encoding farm on premise anyway, and so we now just treat that as another encoding provider. And if we've got a background layer of content that isn't either required very quickly or is just sort of trickling along in the background, we can be saturating that with jobs very easily, and then use the cloud to spike if we get too much content needing to go through. So the last bit is another thing that we've kind of abstracted separately, which is the piece around packaging. So clearly one of the challenges that we all face is delivering lots of different variants, lots of different types of content, and lots of different delivery methods. So the way we went about architecting VideoFactory was to take a view that we do H.264 for kind of everything, and that we just package it differently. We just do HTTP chunks in a different way for each thing. So we went out and procured a packaging layer, this is a product from Code Shop called USP. Again, it's a service that's sort of abstracted, so we could choose to have a different service in there if we wish to. At this moment in time, that's the one we're going with. So we just take those H.264, package it in all the different flavors that we want to. So in the current instance, we're pushing out HLS, HDS, but it's very easy for us to switch into producing Dash, or if we wanted to, Smooth. It just gives us the flexibility to add in those new services very quickly. The other thing here that we begin to talk about, and it's the bit that I'm kind of less keen to talk about today because we haven't launched it all yet. We've done very well with launching the file-based workflow and the Metzname workflow that we've got so far, but we're still in the process of, and we're in the end game of, delivering the kind of live workflow through the chain. In fact, we've started delivering kind of live to VOD around the World Cup and Wimbledon and the other big sporting events at the moment. So we are now beginning to deliver that content much quicker than we would have done previously. But we haven't yet got to a place where we're confident that our simulcast is capable of going through this platform. But essentially, what happens for the simulcast route is that we've got a simulcast transcoder, which is fed by effectively the same stream coming out of our CCMs, our broadcast delivery. That's pushed out as if it were over the internet. I mean, it's basically chunk packets again, traveling across, ingesting into a simulcast transcoder that then does all of the different bitrate renditions we want, and then that's pulled through a cache layer through the USP to deliver all of the final delivery packaged outputs that we're after. And there's just a nod there to the fact that then obviously we can pull VOD through the same process because we can just address specific chunks of that simulcast video, and the download process is exactly the same thing, and we do the encryption for the downloading through that process as well. So just a quick nod to the sort of technologies that we're using underneath. So all the components built as Java applications, run on Amazon EC2. We've got 3 of everything, and generally that's in at least 2 availability zones. At the moment, most of that is within Europe, and I'll touch on that briefly. That's some of the challenges that we've had around adopting the cloud and kind of some of the security concerns that we've needed to deal with there. The message layer is built on top of Apache Camel framework, which is a kind of platform for building message-driven applications, and we make extensive use also of AWS's simple queuing service, which is SQS. Throughout, we've delivered using a kind of BDD or TDD approach, so writing tests in Cucumber and testing all of the components as we go along. And obviously, we've already talked a bit about the fact that we're using extensively continuous deployment, and it means that we can make changes every day much faster. That kind of whole cycle time is reduced enormously. But it also, together with a kind of DevOps model that we've put together, encourages good software development practice, and you know, that's something that we're really keen to continue with. So yeah, I said I wanted to touch briefly on kind of some of the challenges around adopting the cloud. So for a big and generally very risk-averse organisation such as the BBC, there clearly was some concern as being the kind of first big BBC project to land in the cloud. And one of those was around the security of content. And we've managed to mitigate a lot of that by ensuring that it's all encrypted using AES encryption wherever possible. We've secured the service using CA certs. Everything's over HTTPS. And the other one was the kind of general US data center question. And so at the moment, we've generally limited ourselves to, in normal conditions, to European data centers, just as we kind of build up some of that confidence around sharing that. And some of the lack of confidence was around, I guess, some of our more sensitive programming, some of the current affairs stuff, what comes in very late. And the way that we've mitigated that is we just push it through effectively a live late workflow, and it just doesn't sit there on the cloud like some of the file-based programming that we've got. So I've mentioned some of the pros of using the cloud. Clearly it's very flexible, and that enables us to move fast and be light on our feet, but it also engenders good software practices we've talked about. On the con side, one of the biggest issues really was internally. Again, it's another big organisation thing, and I think it's specifically a kind of public service organisation problem, which is really the battle with procurement. So the procurement models that we've got internally haven't really kept up with building and deploying and procuring services in the cloud. And so one of the things we've had to do is kind of take the BBC on a bit of a journey on that one, because we want to move quite a lot faster and be lightweight. We've built in all this flexibility in the platform. You know, if I want to change encode providers next year, I really need to be flexible enough that I can say, right, that's where the best price is, or that's where the best service is, and start to go for that. And that's something that we've started that journey. We're certainly nowhere near completed that journey, and we've got to keep working on that, really. It's not the cheap option necessarily, the cloud, I think, and I think that's, you know, as I highlighted right back at the start, one of the things that we were keen to do was build in that resilience, and this is probably a cheap way of building that resilience, but it is not necessarily the cheapest way of building a kind of transcode or content provisioning service. That, you know, if you have a very stable content model, it's probably just as efficient or more cost efficient to actually build that stuff out on premise. I think the other thing is that obviously when we started this, the kind of platform services that were available, especially in the encoding space, were pretty immature. Weren't very many of them about, you know, kind of even this time last year. There are more about now. That whole idea is consolidating, and also the business models around that are beginning to consolidate. I think the challenge then shifts from specifically the fact that that is so vague to how do we manage working out what the best deal is, and there's some really quite complex modelling, because every provider has a different model for charging, and we've got to do some quite complex modelling about understanding and being able to compare those things effectively. But I'm kind of hoping that should get easier as these things bed down, but I'm not yet convinced. So just a nod to what's next, really. So our focus for what we're now calling VideoFactory, because we're going to pull in all of our audio services as well, for the next kind of 6 to 8 months. So I've mentioned briefly that the simulcast piece, so the live transcoding input throughput, is kind of the absolute focus for us right at this moment in time. But that's followed directly on with moving all of our audio services over. And the idea there is to reuse as much as we possibly can, so not build out a completely different service. So again, organisationally, we've always been in a place where we've had a completely different method for delivering audio than we have for video, and we want to kind of erode that and to be a place where we actually have one service that delivers both, and only making the differences where there are audio specific differences. That's the key to it, really. And I think organisationally, we're in a much better place to deliver that sort of service. So for once, there's one team within the BBC that is beginning to pull all of these services in, and you know, traditionally we've kind of built up in a siloed approach where there have been lots and lots of different groups building services to deliver, and I think organisationally we're in a much better place to deliver that. But the complexity with audio really isn't because audio is difficult to encode or anything else, it's just the sheer number of services we have. We have over 100 different radio networks, and they all have different schedules, and they opt in and out to each other. So there's a lot of complexity around that, and that's the challenge that we've got there. But that will be entirely a live to audio on demand process. It won't be a file-based workflow at all. And the priority for audio very much more is live. So it's probably the other way around for iPlayer in the video domain, where most of the watching is done on demand and is catch-up. In the audio domain, the priority is live because that's the thing that people want to listen to in the first instance. So that's it. I hope that's been useful. By all means, ask some questions.
What European data centers do you use for video capture?
So we're using Amazon AWS. So they have 2 availability zones available within Europe.
The terminology may be different for you, but in your CCM, who is ultimately responsible for monitoring the encoding and the capture to disk? Is it the channel editor for each channel, or is it a separate online team who are monitoring?
So the whole point is it's not a separate online team, and it is the same guys who are responsible for the delivery and the transmission of those broadcast channels. So we've got a number of layers in that process because you've got playout editors and channel editors who have kind of responsibility of getting that stuff out. And then we have an organisation effectively who are responsible for the transmission, and it's that group of people who have joint responsibility for delivering both the online offering and ours. Richard's sitting behind you there, who's head of our online technology group. Do you want to add anything to that? Could do. Sure. So yeah, I do indeed. So we also have sitting within Richard's team. So that takes care specifically of the capture process and of getting the content into our delivery mechanism effectively. So that's monitored very heavily there. Then we have a team, we have an organisation within Future Media which runs the whole operations for the Future Media piece of, which is the transcoding, delivery out to the CDNs, checking that it still works on the final platforms and everything else. And as part of that, we've got a media operations team who are constantly watching, manually pushing through stuff, doing liaison backwards and forwards with missing files and all of that kind of stuff. So we've got a team that's specifically looking at where content is, making sure that it's available at any given time. Does that cover what you're thinking, Richard? Thanks.
Is that capture mechanism primary, or is the primary mechanism taking from the broadcast file?
So I guess I talked about it briefly. I mean, in the first instance, this was the primary, and it's also the baseline. So anything fails, this is the thing that has to run. This is the backstop. This is the thing that means the lights don't go out in iPlayer. So we use this as our kind of absolutely rock solid baseline. The file-based delivery is probably the most important, in that actually what we've got then is nice clean files. It's probably a much better experience. So when we've got those available, those will take kind of priority over it. But this is the thing that we rely on to make sure that we've always got content there in a catch-up way. Sorry, that's not a very good explanation. I'm looking a bit puzzled. This is the backstop. This is the baseline, and then the file-based workflow is a lot of the content, and we will be delivering most of a good, I think 60+% of the content is file-based. And so that might actually beat this process, and if it does, then we'll take those files in precedence to something that's delivered this way. But this is the thing that we rely on if those files don't appear for whatever reason.
What was the main driver behind your choice of transcoding content in this solution?
No, not really historical. So I mean, we challenge these things every time we do a kind of reprocurement around this space. We had good experience with Elemental before. It's a number of different things. So quality is still a very high priority in terms of when we make these choices. So we've got a team of people who are just looking at video encode quality and tweaking things. And so one of the first things that we will do whenever we want to assess a new transcode provider is to check that they're kind of up to our quality or can exceed our quality. So that's always very, very high on the list. But then it's cost, ability to operate the service, all of the normal kind of things. And I guess, interestingly, at the time, Elemental were probably the only people providing that sort of platform. And it wouldn't necessarily have swayed us because we weren't looking for a platform at that point. We were just looking at a way of provisioning encoding. And we could have done that by spinning up our own encode instances and just buying software licenses. But Elemental did provide a platform that allowed us to do that straight off. So we'll continue to look at all of those different models and see whether there are, better or worse approaches. But I think it's quality and cost really are the two, and the ability to operate a service with the sort of throughput that we have, and an SLA around that that's rock solid is probably the important things.
What sort of turnaround time to achieve on live to VOD, and how do you get reliable triggers for personalities?
So live to VOD, as I say, is pretty new. So that's kind of the last couple of weeks that we've got it in place properly. And we're seeing turnaround times actually, so interestingly, and this is a classic case of a big organisation again, the turnaround times are now being limited by our metadata and our metadata throughput. So we're getting to a place where we've optimised the video workflow, and actually now our metadata workflow is probably not quite fast enough, and we'll probably have to go and do a piece around optimising that as well. So I think we're delivering it's sort of in the region of the World Cup matches have been going up in 10 or 15 minutes, so that's for what, a 3-hour programme, probably 10 or 15 minutes after the end of the programme. So not bad, but could be better. No, well, it's not transcode. So you're just reusing the chunks that you've pushed out in the live stream. So there are some limitations with it. It doesn't necessarily service all the platforms because there are some platforms that can't take those live chunks. So some of the sort of mediated VOD services we might have to deliver separately afterwards, and they might have to still go through the slower process. But it does deliver probably, certainly an 80-20, probably more than that. It's probably 90% of our output across the piece pretty quickly. And in terms of the triggers, so again, I touched on it briefly. So partly that's a manual operation. So if we haven't got triggers from broadcast, so we do take triggers directly from playout, and if we get those triggers reliably and satisfactorily, we will use those in the first instance. And if we don't, then we have the MMO operation that Richard mentioned, who will be able to put those triggers in for high-profile content when we want to do. So that's that's something that's obviously a bit more limited because we're limited around the amount of capacity we can put at that.
Can you explain a little bit about your transport into S3 and out of S3 and how you manage your connectivity and costs?
Yep. Richard, can you help me with that? I mean, I can talk a little bit about it, but you may be better placed in terms of costs.
So we work quite hard on the connectivity from the network. Can you hear me? From the network that we run to the Amazon network. We've actually got 4 routes in there, so we've got quite a disconnect. We've got their direct connect. We peer with them, and the backstop's over transit, so that gives us a very high level of resilience in terms of how the network connectivity itself works. Obviously, we prioritise the route that gives us the lowest traffic costs.
Okay, any more for any more?
There was news about download to own smartphone. Is this scalable?
So broadly, it can cope with a lot of different options, i.e. It's not a use case that we've specifically built into this in the first instance, but when these sort of new use cases come up, we've got the capability to respond to those, I think, relatively well now. But that doesn't mean to say we won't need to build new components to do some of that, or a slightly different approach. But Okay. Thank you very much, in which case we finished a couple of minutes early.